I'm calling off the engagement with you. I can't let people see me with you anymore.
The man she was supposed to marry looked at her like she was already dead. Simone William lay in a hospital bed, still healing, learning how to walk without flinching at her own reflection, when Jackson Reed told her the engagement was over. He didn't raise his voice, nor did he even look angry. He simply said he couldn't be seen with her anymore, that people were already talking, and that this wasn't the life he signed up for. Then he walked away, leaving her laying there with a silver ring she didn't even remember to take off. What Simone didn't notice was the woman standing at the door entrance. Her stepmother, Vivian William, arms folded, lips curved into the faintest, most satisfied smile. If you love stories where the people the world tries to destroy come back stronger than anyone expected, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to take you somewhere you won't see coming. For you to really know how Simone ended up in that hospital bed, broken and alone, I have to tell where it all started 8 months, to the night everything was taken from her. Simone William grew up as the only daughter of Gregory William, a wealthy but painfully weak man who inherited more money than backbone. Her mother had passed years earlier, leaving behind a fortune meant for Simone, tied up in trusts and legal language that wouldn't fully release until a certain age. Gregory remarried a woman named Vivian, who smiled in every family photo and calculated in every private moment. On a night 8 months ago, Simone was driving home from an event when another heavy vehicle came out of nowhere, slamming into her car with a force that should have killed her. It didn't, but it left her with permanent scarring across the side of her face, and it left her mother's inheritance sitting exactly where Vivian wanted it, frozen, unresolved, and waiting. What no one else in that family knew, including the police and their report, was that Vivian had arranged the entire crash.
The work is done, ma'am.
She paid a driver quietly to execute it. A woman who had learned exactly how to disappear into the role of the concerned stepmother while destroying the one person standing between her and complete control of the family fortune. While Simone lay in a hospital bed fighting to survive, Vivian was in Gregory's study, guiding his trembling hand across paperwork that slowly transferred more and more control of the family estate into her name. Gregory didn't ask enough questions. He had spent years learning that agreeing with his wife was easier than opposing her. When Simone finally woke up, months into her recovery, the world she once knew had already moved on without her. Her fiancé had grown distant long before the hospital conversation. Her father visited less and less, always with an excuse, always avoiding eyes contact, the scar that now lived permanently across her face. She had survived a crash that should have killed her, and somehow, that felt like the smaller tragedy compared to being slowly erased by the people who were supposed to love her. It was Vivian who came to her with the next devastating chapter of this plan, dressed up as concern. She told Simone that with her reputation damaged, her engagement gone, and whispers spreading through their social circle, there was only one way to protect the family name: a marriage. Not to a gentleman from their world, but to a man everyone in the city feared and no one dared question. A crime boss named Junho. Gregory hesitated, for once showing a flicker of a father's instinct. But Vivian was patient, and patient people always win against weak ones. She reminded him of the debts he owed Vang's organization, debts from business dealings gone wrong, debts that could destroy what remained of the family if left unpaid. A marriage, she said, would settle everything. It would make the scandal disappear. Here's a question for you before we continue. If you had to choose between disappearing quietly or standing your ground even when the whole world had already written you off, which one would you choose? Type your answer in the comments, because Simone's choice is about to change everything. While all of this was unfolding, in another part of the city entirely, Junho sat across a table from men who believed his silence meant weakness. But it didn't. Junho rarely raised his voice, showed his hand, and rarely gave anyone the satisfaction of seeing what he was thinking. The men across that table learned that lesson permanently. Junho didn't care about marriage, alliances, or the Williams family's crumbling reputation. What he cared about was a debt Gregory William owed him that has gone unpaid for far too long. When the offer came through, marriage to Gregory's daughter in exchange for erasing that debt entirely, Junho agreed without hesitation. Not like he wanted a wife or felt sympathy for a woman he had never met. He only agreed because it was simply a good business, and business was the only language he trusted. When Simone was brought to meet him for the first time, she expected exactly what everyone had trained her to expect: disgust, rejection, and perhaps even cruelty. She had spent 8 months watching people's eyes flicker toward her scar before quickly looking away, pretending not to notice what they had already judged. She braced herself for the same reaction from the most feared man in the city, but it never came. Junho really looked at her, and yet his expression never changed. He simply told her, in a calm voice,
I'm not marrying you out of pity or anything. I'm only fulfilling an obligation.
Hope we're good.
nothing more, nothing less. And somehow, that cold honesty felt more respectful than anything Jackson had ever said to her this past times. The wedding that followed was nothing like the one Simone had once dreamed of. No white dress chosen with excitement. No family celebrating with genuine joy. It was small, quiet, and transactional, held in a room that felt more like a business meeting than a union between two people. Vivian watched from the side with that same satisfied smile, believing she had just orchestrated the final chapter of Simone's downfall. But as Simone signed her name beside Junho, becoming legally bound to a man the entire city feared, she had no idea that this marriage, the one designed to finish destroying her, was about to become the very thing that saved her life. If this story already has you hooked, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because the truth Junho is about to uncover will change everything Simone thought she knew about the night that scarred her forever. She had no idea the medication in her hand had already been tampered with. And if Junho hadn't walked in at that exact moment, this story would have ended right there. But let's rewind, because to understand how close Simone came to losing her life a second time, we need to go back to the day she first arrived at Junho estate, expecting to be locked away and forgotten. Simone braced herself for isolation, expected a cold room somewhere far from the rest of the house. Instead, she was led to her own private wing, fully staffed, with a view overlooking gardens she never imagined she'd be allowed to call hers. She stood there for a long moment, waiting for the catch, because in her experience, kindness never arrived without one. She wasn't aware that Junho had already given his men a direct order.
I don't want to see anyone disrespect my wife or look at her with pity. Do you understand me?
Yes, boss.
No one in that house was permitted to disrespect her. Not with words, not even with looks, talk less with the smallest gesture of disdain. His own inner circle exchanged confused glances when they heard it, because the man they worked for had never once extended that kind of protection to anyone, let alone a wife he barely knew. Simone overheard two of his men whispering about it one evening in the hallway, their voices low but not quiet enough. They said Junho had never protected a woman like this before, not once, not ever. Simone stood frozen behind the door, trying to understand what kind of man she had actually married, and if you're enjoying how this story keeps unfolding, hit that subscribe button now, because the deeper Simone gets into this marriage, the more dangerous the truth becomes. It was during a tense business dinner that Simone truly caught Junho's attention. One of his advisors was outlining a deal, confident and dismissive, until Simone calmly pointed out a flaw buried inside the numbers, a mistake that could have cost the organization a devastating amount of money. The table went silent. The advisor's face reddened. And Junho, a man who rarely showed reaction to anything, allowed the faintest trace of surprise to cross his face. After that night, Junho began seeking her opinion privately, on matters far beyond what a marriage of convenience should ever require. He told himself it was practical, that her intelligence was simply useful. But somewhere beneath that explanation was something else entirely, the discomfort of realizing he valued her. Then came the photograph. While going through old family documents that Vivian had insisted didn't exist, Simone found a picture of her mother tucked away, hidden as though someone had wanted it forgotten. Her hands trembled as she held it, memories of a woman she barely had time to know to her taste, flooding back all at once. And it wasn't the only time her hands shook. Junho noticed that whenever the crash was mentioned, even in passing, Simone's composure cracked in small, involuntary ways. A man who read people for a living didn't need much more than that to know something about the official story didn't add up. Quietly, without telling Simone, Junho assigned one of his most trusted men to dig into the crash records from 8 months earlier. He wasn't doing it out of duty. He was doing it because something inside him refused to accept that the woman sitting across from him at dinner every night was simply the victim of bad luck. Not long after, Vivian arrived at the estate uninvited, dressed in concern. She asked Simone how she was adjusting, if the marriage had been difficult, if she needed anything at all. But underneath every question was a test, a probing search to see whether Simone had grown weaker or more fragile inside these walls, but she hadn't. For the first time in her life, Simone looked her stepmother directly in the eye and stood her ground, calm and unshaken, refusing to give Vivian the reaction she had come there hunting for. Vivian's expression cooled instantly, the mask slipping just enough to reveal something colder underneath, a thing far more planning than concern. Here's a question worth sitting with my viewers. When someone who hurt you comes back pretending to care, do you think it's better to confront them directly or protect your peace by staying silent? Let me know in the comments, because Simone's next move might surprise you. Junho's investigator returned with information that changed everything. The crash report from 8 months ago had been altered, key details quietly buried, and a significant payment had been made to the officer originally assigned to investigate it. This wasn't an accident anyone had simply failed to explain properly. This was a cover-up, carefully built and paid for. And then, before anyone could fully process that discovery, someone tried to kill Simone again. It came disguised as medication, something so small and routine that no one would have thought twice about it, tampered with just enough to be lethal. If Junho hadn't insisted on a level of caution that bordered on obsession, checking, watching, refusing to leave anything to chance, Simone would not have survived that day. Shaken and finally out of options, Junho confronted her directly, demanding to know what danger was following her, what she wasn't telling him. And for the first time since their wedding day, Simone let her guard fall completely. She told him everything about the crash 8 months ago, about the questions that never made sense, about the inheritance that never fully settled, about a stepmother who always seemed a little too calm in the face of tragedy. Junho listened without interrupting, and when she finished, he told her something he hadn't allowed himself to admit even in his own mind. That somewhere between the transaction and the danger, he had come to care about her, far beyond anything this arrangement ever required of him. The tension between them shifted into something neither of them expected. Sensing that the walls were closing in, Vivian moved faster than ever before. She pressured Gregory relentlessly, pushing him to finalize the transfer of the inheritance before anything could unravel further, before Simone or anyone else had the chance to stop her. And as if the danger weren't enough, Jackson resurfaced. The same man who abandoned Simone the moment her face changed now returned, suddenly interested in reconciliation, suddenly aware of the wealth and power attached to her new husband's name. Simone looked at him and felt nothing but clarity. She finally understood the difference between being loved with conditions and being chosen without any at all. She turned him away without hesitation. By the time Junho's men traced the payment behind the crash cover-up directly to one of Vivian's private accounts, there was no more room for doubt. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was evidence, undeniable and waiting to be used. Vivian's carefully constructed world was standing on the edge of collapse, and she had no idea how close the exposure truly was. If you don't want to miss the moment this entire conspiracy comes crashing down, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are turned on, because as the truth finally reaches the people who can no longer ignore it. Vivian William thought she had buried the truth so deep it would never surface. She was wrong, for her days were numbered. In less than 24 hours, she would be standing on the grounds of the very estate she tried to use to destroy her stepdaughter, watching her entire plans collapse in front of legal authorities, her own family, and the woman she once believed was too broken to fight back. Junho sat across from Simone in his study, a folder of evidence spread across the table between them. Financial records, altered police reports, and a payment trail leading directly to one of Vivian's private accounts. He didn't soften the truth for her, because he had learned by now that Simone didn't need protecting from reality. She needed the truth laid out plainly so she could decide what to do with it herself. And what the evidence confirmed was undeniable. Vivian hadn't simply taken advantage of an accident. She had orchestrated it. The crash 8 months ago, the one that scarred Simone's face and nearly ended her life, had been planned from the very beginning, all to seize control of an inheritance that was never Vivian's to take. Simone sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the documents that finally explained years of confusion, grief, and unanswered questions. And when she finally spoke, it wasn't with the trembling voice of a woman who had just discovered her stepmother tried to kill her. She told Junho she wanted to confront Vivian herself. Junho's instinct, the one shaped by years of running an organization through fear and control, was to handle it his way. But Simone stopped him before that instinct could take over. She told him this wasn't his battle to fight for her. It was hers to finish, in front of the people who had spent years watching her be dismissed, doubted, and discarded. Junho, calm himself, and didn't argue. He simply nodded, understanding that some fires had to be lit by the person who had been burned by them first. The evidence was brought before Gregory William first. Junho insisted on it, knowing that Gregory, weak as he was, still held enough influence to either protect Vivian or finally do right by his daughter. Gregory sat at his desk, hands trembling as he flipped through page after page, the color draining from his face with every line he read. This wasn't a rumor, neither was it speculation. This was proof, cold and undeniable, that the woman he had shared his life with for years had tried to murder his own daughter. For a long time in his life, Gregory William forced to choose between his wife and his daughter, the woman who had controlled him for years and the child he had failed to protect from her. And for once, weak as he had always been, he didn't look away. The confrontation took place at the estate, in front of family, legal authorities, and members of Junho's own trusted circle, assembled at Simone's request. Vivian arrived expecting concern, the same fragile family dynamic she had manipulated for years. Instead, she walked into a room where the truth was already waiting for her. She denied everything at first, exactly as everyone expected her to. She turned to Gregory with wounded eyes, accusing Simone of fabricating lies out of jealousy, out of resentment for a marriage that had elevated her status beyond what she deserved. She turned to the rest of the family, attempting one final time to paint herself as the victim and Simone as the ungrateful daughter who could never accept a mother's love. It was a performance she had given 1,000 times before, one that had always worked. But unfortunately, this time the drama series were over. Simone stepped forward, and without raising her voice, giving out nothing, Vivian, the emotional reaction she had hoped to provoke, presented the financial records showing the payment made 8 months ago. She presented the altered police report, the one that had conveniently buried the truth about the night of the crash. She laid it all out methodically, calmly, refusing to let Vivian twist the narrative the way she always had. The room fell silent. Vivian's carefully maintained composure began to crack piece by piece as the weight of undeniable evidence closed in around her. She looked at Gregory, searching for the same blind loyalty he had given her for years, but this time he didn't offer it. She looked at the legal authorities standing quietly at the edge of the room, waiting, watching, no longer willing to simply take her word over documented proof. Cornered, with no more lies left to hide behind, Vivian did something she never intended to do. She snapped. In a moment of pure, unfiltered rage, she turned on Simone and said the words that ended everything. She admitted she had planned the crash, admitted she never expected Simone to survive it, admitted that the inheritance was always meant to be hers and hers alone, and that Simone had simply been an obstacle standing in the way of what she deserved. The confession came out raw, uncontrolled. Vivian was arrested right there on the estate grounds, the same grounds she once believed she would use to finish erasing Simone from the family entirely. Officers escorted her out as she shouted, as she tried one final time to twist the situation, to blame everyone but herself. But no one in that room was listening anymore. The control she had spent years building, manipulating, and protecting had been stripped away in a matter of minutes. Gregory William broke down the moment Vivian was taken from the property. Years of blindness, years of choosing comfort over courage, years of watching his daughter suffer while he looked the other way, all of it came crashing down at once. He turned to Simone, his voice breaking, and apologized not with excuses or justifications, but with the raw regret of a father who finally understood exactly what his silence had cost her. Simone didn't offer forgiveness immediately. She didn't owe him that, so she allowed him the space to come to his senses. In the days that followed, the legal process moved quickly. With the confession, the financial records, and the altered police report all confirmed, the inheritance that had been frozen and manipulated for months was formally restored to Simone. Fully hers and protected under the law. No longer something Vivian could dangle over her, or something anyone could take from her again. Also, the corrupt officer was jail alongside Vivian. And then came the conversation Simone never expected to have. Junho sat across from her, the danger finally gone, the arrangement that once bound them legally no longer necessary. He told her, plainly and without hesitation, that she was free. The debt had been settled long ago. The threat against her life had been eliminated. There was no more reason for her to stay in a marriage that had started as nothing more than a transaction. He told her she could walk away, rebuild her life entirely on her own terms, without owing him or anyone else a single explanation. Simone looked at him for a long moment, the same way she had looked at him the very first day they met, when she expected rejection and received honesty instead. She told him she wasn't leaving. Not because she needed his protection, neither was it because she needed his name or resources, but because for the first time in those years, staying was a decision she was making entirely for herself, without pressure nor manipulation. She chose him not out of obligation, but out of something real that had grown quietly between them through danger, honesty, and the kind of trust neither of them had expected to find. Simone standing beside Junho, her scar fully visible, no longer hidden beneath shame or the weight of other people's judgment. The world that once called her damaged, the world that once decided her worth based on a single mark on her face, watched as she stood tall beside one of the most feared men in the city, finally seen, finally valued, finally free. Here's a question I'd love for you to answer in the comments. Do you believe real love is built through grand gestures, or through the quiet moments where someone chooses to stay even when they don't have to? Let me know what you think. Love you all, and I'm still the writer and director. Charles.